What does the Bible say about circumcision? What does the Bible say about circumcision? The Bible mentions circumcision several times, most prominently in Genesis 17:10-14. In this passage, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the men of his household to be a sign of the covenant between them. According to this passage, circumcision is a sign of obedience to God and a reminder of the covenant. Circumcision is also mentioned in Leviticus 12:3, where it is said to be a sign of the covenant between God and the Israelites. The Bible also states that circumcision is a sign of cleanliness and holiness before God. In addition, the Bible speaks of the spiritual benefits of circumcision, such as being set apart for God and being able to partake in the blessings of the covenant. What does the Bible say about circumcision? Circumcision is a surgical procedure in which the foreskin of the male genitalia is removed. This practice is ancient and is most commonly associated with Jewish culture, but it is also practiced in other religions and cultures around the world. Circumcision has a long history in the Bible, with many passages referring to it as a sign of covenant between God and man. This blog post will explore the significance of circumcision in the Bible, with a particular focus on what it says about gender roles. What is circumcision? Circumcision is a surgical procedure in which the foreskin of the male genitalia is removed. This procedure is typically performed on newborns, and can also be done later in life for medical or cultural reasons. It is a religious practice for some, and is also seen as a cultural tradition in certain parts of the world. Jewish steps in circumcision. Milah. The first step in the Jewish circumcision ritual is known as milah. During this step, the foreskin of the baby's penis is removed with a special surgical knife called a mogan. Priya. The second step of the ritual is known as priya. During this step, the circumcision practitioner, or mohel, checks to make sure that the foreskin has been completely removed and that the circumcision site is properly healing. Pariya. The third step of the circumcision ritual is known as pariya. During this step, the practitioner will use a special tool to scrape the inner and outer layers of the foreskin to ensure that it has been completely removed. Metzitza. The fourth step of the circumcision ritual is known as metzitza. During this step, the practitioner will use a special tool to make tiny incisions around the circumcision site in order to help the baby's penis heal properly. Brit milah. The fifth and final step of the circumcision ritual is known as brit milah. During this step, the mohel will give a blessing to the baby and his family, and the baby will be given a special name. After this step is completed, the circumcision is considered complete. What is the meaning of circumcision? Circumcision has multiple meanings in the Bible. In the Old Testament, circumcision was seen as a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham. This covenant was a sign of Abraham's faithfulness to God, and a symbol of the relationship between the two. In addition, the act of circumcision was seen as a symbol of Abraham's obedience to God's will. Circumcision has been a religious practice since ancient times. It has been a part of Jewish culture since the time of Abraham and is still practiced today. It is also mentioned in the Bible in both the Old and New Testaments. But what does the Bible actually say about circumcision? In this blog, we will explore the various scriptures that mention circumcision and its spiritual significance. We will look at what Jesus said about it, what the King James Version of the Bible has to say, and how the Catholic Bible views this practice. Finally, we will examine what circumcision symbolizes and how it can help us in our spiritual journey. Reasons religions practice circumcision today. Religious rites. Circumcision is often part of traditional religious ceremonies within certain faith communities, such as Judaism and Islam. In Judaism, the practice is known as brit milah, or the covenant of circumcision, and is performed on male infants 8 days after they are born. In Islam, circumcision is recommended but not mandatory. Health benefits. Circumcision is believed to have health benefits, including reduced risk of urinary tract infections, sexually transmitted infections, and penile cancer. The American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends circumcision for newborns, as studies have shown that it may also reduce the risk of HIV transmission. Cultural norms. In some cultures, circumcision is an accepted practice. Many African cultures, for example, practice circumcision for both boys and girls as part of coming-of-age rituals. Hygiene. Circumcision may improve hygiene, as the foreskin may trap bacteria and irritate the glands. Removing the foreskin may also reduce the risk of inflammation and infection. Aesthetic reasons. For some, circumcision is viewed as a cosmetic procedure, as it may improve the appearance of the penis. Convenience. Circumcision may make it easier to clean the penis, which may reduce the risk of infection. Religions practice circumcision today. Judaism. Judaism is one of the oldest religions in the world, and circumcision is a key part of the faith. It is part of the covenant between God and the Jewish people, and so is practiced by all Jewish males. The circumcision is usually done when the baby is 8 days old. Islam. Islam is a monotheistic religion founded in the 7th century. Circumcision is an integral part of the faith, and is seen as a sign of purity and cleanliness. It is usually performed when a boy is 7 days old. Christianity. Although circumcision is not required by all Christian denominations, some Christian sects practice it, particularly in areas where it has been traditionally done. It is usually done as a sign of dedication to the faith or to mark a special occasion, such as a baptism. Hinduism is an ancient religion with many different sects, but few practice circumcision. It is believed that circumcision is a sign of purity and cleanliness, and is usually done when the boy is 11 or 12. Buddhism does not require any form of circumcision, but some Buddhist sects practice it in certain countries. It is usually done as a sign of dedication to the faith or to mark a special occasion, such as a baptism. Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith is a monotheistic religion founded in the 19th century. Circumcision is not a requirement of the faith, but it is practiced by some adherents in certain countries. It is usually done as a sign of dedication to the faith or to mark a special occasion, such as a baptism. Does the Bible say we have to be circumcised? The Bible does not explicitly say that believers must be circumcised. Instead, it uses circumcision as a means of distinguishing between the Jews and the Gentiles. In the Old Testament, God commanded the Israelites to be circumcised as a sign of the covenant between God and the Israelites. Genesis 17:10-14. So in the Old Testament, circumcision was a sign of being part of the covenant with God. What did Jesus say about circumcision? In the New Testament, Jesus did not mention circumcision directly, but he did speak of it indirectly. In Mark 7:3-4, Jesus said that what goes into a man's mouth does not defile him, but what comes out of it. He was referring to dietary laws, which were based on the Old Testament laws. He was also implying that the outward sign of circumcision was not as important as the inward holiness of the heart. What does the Bible say about circumcision? KJV. The King James Version of the Bible has several passages that mention circumcision. In Genesis 17:10-14, God commanded Abraham to circumcise himself and his descendants as a sign of the covenant between God and the Israelites. In Leviticus 12:3, God commanded that all newborn males should be circumcised on the 8th day. In Acts 7:8, Stephen mentioned that the covenant of circumcision was given to Abraham. What does the Bible say about circumcision in the New Testament? The New Testament does not specifically mention circumcision, but does mention it indirectly. In Romans 2:25-29, Paul explains that circumcision is not necessary for salvation, but rather a symbol of faith in God. He also explains that true circumcision is of the heart, not of the flesh. Colossians 2:11-12. Spiritual significance of circumcision. The spiritual significance of circumcision is that it is a sign of faith in God and a symbol of the covenant between God and the Israelites. It is also a reminder of our commitment to God and His commands. In the New Testament, circumcision is seen as a symbol of faith, not as a requirement for salvation. What does the Catholic Bible say about circumcision? The Catholic Bible does not explicitly mention circumcision, but it does mention it indirectly. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that the Old Testament firmly established the practice of circumcision. It also says that in the New Testament, circumcision has lost its importance and is no longer required. What did circumcision symbolize? Circumcision symbolized the covenant between God and the Israelites. It was a physical sign of the commitment between God and His people. It also symbolized a spiritual cleansing and a spiritual rebirth. In the New Testament, circumcision is still a symbol of faith in God and a reminder of our commitment to Him. What significance does circumcision have in the Bible? Circumcision has a significant meaning in the Bible, as it serves as a symbol of the covenant between God and man. This covenant was seen as a sign of faithfulness and obedience to God, and demonstrated the relationship between God and man. In addition, circumcision was seen as a symbol of purity, as it was believed to rid the body of impurities. In the New Testament, circumcision is no longer seen as a necessary act, but rather as a symbol of faith. What Bible verses address circumcision? Circumcision is addressed in several passages throughout the Bible. In Genesis 17:10-14, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household, as a sign of the covenant between them. In the New Testament, Paul writes about the importance of spiritual circumcision in Romans 2:25-29, and in Colossians 2:10-12 he states that physical circumcision is no longer necessary. How is circumcision metaphorically used in the Bible? Circumcision is also used as a metaphor in the Bible. In Romans 2:25-29, Paul states that spiritual circumcision is more important than physical circumcision. He states that spiritual circumcision is a sign of faith and obedience to God, and is a sign of the covenant between God and man. In addition, circumcision is used as a metaphor for a spiritual cleansing, where one is purified by getting rid of impurities. Where are conflicts surrounding circumcision found in the Bible? Conflicts surrounding circumcision can be found in the New Testament. In Acts 15, there is a debate between Jewish and Gentile believers about the necessity of physical circumcision. The Jewish believers argue that physical circumcision is necessary for salvation, while the Gentiles argue that it is not. In the end, the apostles decide that physical circumcision is not necessary. Conflicts around circumcision found in the Old Testament. Abraham and Ishmael. In Genesis 17:23-27, Abraham is commanded by God to circumcise himself and all his household, including Ishmael, his son with Hagar. Ishmael was originally opposed to the idea, but Abraham's insistence led to the circumcision being carried out. Moses and Zipporah. In Exodus 4:24-26, Moses is commanded by God to circumcise his son, but when he does not comply, his wife, Zipporah, takes matters into her own hands and circumcises the child. Joshua and the Israelites. In Joshua 5:2-8, God commands Joshua to circumcise the Israelites as a sign of their covenant with God. The Israelites were reluctant to comply, but Joshua eventually persuaded them to do so. Saul and David. In 1 Samuel 18:25-27, Saul commands David to be circumcised as a sign of loyalty to him. David complies, but Saul's intentions were likely to weaken David's military prowess. Rehoboam and Jeroboam. In 1 Kings 12:24, Rehoboam, king of Judah, commanded all of his subjects to be circumcised. Jeroboam, king of Israel, refused to comply and instead began a rebellion against Rehoboam. Josiah and the people of Judah. In 2 Kings 23:3, Josiah commanded all of the people of Judah to be circumcised as a sign of their covenant with God. The people complied and the ritual was carried out. Conflicts around circumcision found in the New Testament. Paul and the circumcision of Titus. In Galatians 2:3-5, Paul recounts how he resisted the pressure of the apostles to have Titus, a Gentile convert, circumcised. This conflict shows how Paul was willing to stand up to the other apostles in defending his belief that Gentiles do not need to be circumcised to be saved. Paul and the circumcision of Timothy. In Acts 16:3, Paul circumcises Timothy, a half-Jewish convert, to avoid offending Jewish Christians. This conflict highlights Paul's pragmatic approach to the issue of circumcision and his willingness to compromise in order to maintain unity in the early church. Paul and the Judaizers. In Galatians 5:2-4, Paul condemns the Judaizers, who taught that Gentiles must be circumcised in order to be saved. This conflict reveals Paul's uncompromising stance that Gentiles are not required to be circumcised in order to be part of the church. Peter and Cornelius. In Acts 10:45-48, Peter baptizes Cornelius, a Gentile convert, without requiring him to be circumcised. This conflict demonstrates that the early church was beginning to move away from the traditional Jewish practice of circumcision. James and the Council of Jerusalem. In Acts 15:1-29, James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, decides that Gentiles do not need to be circumcised in order to be saved. This conflict reveals the importance of James' decision in paving the way for the church to accept Gentiles without requiring circumcision. What does the King James Version say about circumcision? The King James Version of the Bible is one of the most widely used translations of the Bible. The King James Version of the Bible does not explicitly refer to circumcision, but it does make references to the act. In Genesis 17:10-14, the King James Version states that Abraham is to circumcise himself and his household, as a sign of the covenant between himself and God. How is circumcision viewed in a Christian context? In a Christian context, circumcision is seen as a symbol of faith and obedience to God. In the New Testament, physical circumcision is no longer seen as necessary, but rather as a sign of faith. In addition, circumcision is seen as a symbol of spiritual cleansing, where one is purified by getting rid of impurities. What does the Bible say about physical circumcision? The Bible states that physical circumcision is no longer necessary for salvation, as it is a sign of faith and not of physical purity. In Acts 15, the apostles decide that physical circumcision is not necessary. However, in the Old Testament, circumcision was seen as a sign of the covenant between God and man. What does the Bible say about spiritual circumcision? In the New Testament, spiritual circumcision is seen as more important than physical circumcision. Paul writes about the importance of spiritual circumcision in Romans 2:25-29, stating that it is a sign of faith and obedience to God, and a symbol of the relationship between God and man. What does the Bible say about today's customs of circumcision? The Bible does not explicitly address today's customs of circumcision. However, it does state that physical circumcision is not necessary for salvation. In addition, the Bible states that spiritual circumcision is more important than physical circumcision, and is a sign of faith and obedience to God. What are the different views of circumcision in the Bible? In the Bible, there are different views on circumcision. In the Old Testament, circumcision was seen as a sign of the covenant between God and man. In the New Testament, physical circumcision is no longer seen as necessary, but rather as a symbol of faith. In addition, circumcision is seen as a metaphor for spiritual cleansing. How is circumcision linked to faith in the Bible? Circumcision is linked to faith in the Bible, as it is seen as a sign of faith and obedience to God. In the New Testament, Paul writes about the importance of spiritual circumcision in Romans 2:25-29, stating that it is a sign of faith and obedience to God. and a symbol of the relationship between God and man. What are the different interpretations of circumcision in the Bible? The Bible has different interpretations of circumcision, depending on the context. In the Old Testament, circumcision was seen as a sign of the covenant between God and man. In the New Testament, physical circumcision is no longer seen as necessary, but rather as a symbol of faith. In addition, circumcision is seen as a metaphor for spiritual cleansing. Final thoughts. What does the Bible say about circumcision? Circumcision has a long history in the Bible, with many passages referring to it as a sign of the covenant between God and man. This blog post explored the significance of circumcision in the Bible, with a particular focus on what it says about gender roles. It discussed the meaning of circumcision, the different views of circumcision in the Bible, and the different interpretations of circumcision in the Bible. In the end, it was concluded that circumcision is a symbol of faith and obedience to God, and is a sign of the covenant between God and man. Greg. Father, grandfather, minister, missionary, deacon, elder, author, welcome to our family. View all posts.